Well, Israel's long journey through the wilderness is finally over, and now it's time to cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land. Throughout Deuteronomy, the Lord had continually reminded Israel of who He is and what it means to live together as His people. He had outlined and underlined the conditions of the covenant, the life and the blessing of trusting Him to be God and walking in His ways, and the devastating results of refusing to trust Him and instead turning and walking in our own way. He had commissioned Joshua to be the new leader of God's people. And now in today's reading, in Deuteronomy 32 to 34, just before Moses dies, and just before they enter the land, the Lord tells Moses to sing this song as a testimony which reminds them of the nature of their history with the Lord and the nature of their future with the Lord. And though the details change, this is really the story of God's people in every place and in every generation. He begins by reminding them of God's incredible goodness and His perfect and continual faithfulness towards them. Verses 3 to 4, ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, and all His ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without injustice, good and upright is He. And then in contrast, He reminds them of Israel's incredible rebellion and faithlessness towards God. He says in verses 5 to 6 that they have been a foolish and unwise people. They have been corrupt. He says they have become like illegitimate children because they have rejected the Father who both created them and redeemed them. He chose Israel. He brought them to Himself. He provided for them. He cared for them. He guided them. But He says in verse 15 that they got comfortable in His provision and care. Israel grew fat. They forsook the God who made them, the God who saved them. They forgot the Lord. They worshiped other gods. They neglected His word, and so in verse 20 He refers to them as sons in whom there is no faithfulness. But the Lord is so merciful and so faithful. He says in verse 36, He will yet again have compassion on His people. He will show them the emptiness and the lack of life in the idols and in the gods that they've been worshiping, and then He'll call them to return to Himself. He will one day, He says, fully and finally deal with all of His enemies and the enemies of His people, and He will redeem His people, and they will live with Him in the land forever. In chapter 33, Moses gives a final blessing to each one of the tribes of Israel, and then he ends the chapter with an exclamation of delight and amazement at the joy and the privilege and the security of being the people of God. Verse 26, he says, there is none like the God of Israel, who rides the heaven to your help and through the skies in His majesty. He says the eternal God is a dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He drove out the enemy before you, and so Israel dwells in security. Blessed are you, O Israel, He said, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. The Song of Moses isn't just their song, though. It's our song, too. Revelation 15 says that all the redeemed people of God will stand in His presence one day, and they will sing the Song of Moses together. Now, it had said about Moses in Deuteronomy 34 that there has never been a prophet like him whom the Lord knew face to face. But then the Lord Himself took on human flesh and came in the person of Jesus, and He delivered us to be His people, not by plagues and signs and wonders of great power, but by giving Himself in weakness, by laying down His life so that we could have life. And as we journey through this wilderness that we call life, as we stand on the edge of our promised land, the Lord reminds us that we will not only sing the song of Moses one day, but we will together sing the song of Jesus, the Lamb. And the eternal God will be our dwelling place, and we will rest in the strength and the peace and the security and the joy of His everlasting arms, in His presence forever.